Hey y'all, welcome to Noetic. I'm CJ and I'm joined by Jordan Cline.
Hey everyone.
And we are delving into part 6.
Yep. Chapter 6.
Chapter 6 of Montaigne's essays. Now, Michel de Montaigne was a French writer during the late 16th century, and he is known as the founder, or at least he kind of put the flag down for the literary genre we know today as essays. There wasn't any sort of description of such a genre before Montaigne came into play, and this book of essays opened the door for the personal essay, the creative essay, the essays we have to put down in our SATs. He did
curses.
So a sort of blessing and a curse at the same time. But Montaigne opened the door of just exposing what you think about something.
Yeah, and I think that with Montaigne, these are just sort of his musings.
Yes, and it came from a time when he retired from the family business and from
public life
and from work with the courts and the government, and he needed in some way to reflect on who he was and what he thought, and in a sense that spirit is what drives what we think of when we think of the essay as this sort of attempt or taste, to use the
like sampling,
a sampling of certain ideas and seeing where they go. I like the analogy to a river, that they just keep going along and sometimes they go off in different directions. But Montaigne is sort of the first part of that tradition that we know and love today. And and Jordan's going to illuminate us on one such essay that is titled "The Hour of Parleying is Dangerous."
Dun dun dun. So thank you, CJ, for that little introduction for Montaigne. And one thing that I wanted to do before we jumped right in was I wanted to define the term parley.
Please.
Because for me, the only time I've really heard the term parley is from Pirates of the Caribbean, when Elizabeth Swann says, "I invoke the right of parley." And I was like, what is that? Interesting. So before we jump in, let's just lay down some terminology. To parley is to talk with an enemy or someone you disagree with, especially in order to end a conflict.
So negotiation.
Right.
Okay.
So just a peace talks or a peace negotiation. So that is the terminology for, or definition for parley.
Wonderful. Is there any other introductory remarks?
Nope, that was it. That was just that was my sort of primary clarifying note.
Wonderful. Do you mind if I add one?
Sure.
Sure. So a lot of what Jordan's going to go through, Montaigne, as much as we say he's a philosopher, I feel like he's also a historian.
Oh, yeah.
In some respects. So we're going to get a lot of examples from history that snowball into some idea. So I just want to make sure that we know that, because a lot of what Jordan's going to be doing is going through these examples one by one. And in some respects, it might seem redundant, but it is part of Montaigne's vision.
Yeah, and I mean, he's very steeped in a classical tradition. So it's what's interesting about Montaigne is that he uses, and he switches back and forth between ancient examples and then contemporary examples.
Yeah, and it sort of culminates into something that's really gets the point across for me. As much as I thought, this is going to just be like a history
Cut
textbook.
and dry, boring.
But it brings these examples to light and what he's talking about to light in such a way that just by adding it's the accumulative effect, brings something magical to what he's talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with that, let's let's get into some of this magic.
The hour of parlaying is dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that this follows on our last essay that we did, which was called whether the governor of a place besieged should go out to parlay. Mm-hmm. So in that last essay that we did, he points out the potential, dangers of going out, and in this essay he actually talks about why mm-hmm. it's dangerous. And one thing that we talked about last time, which I think is very pertinent in this essay, is the concept of honor. Mm-hmm. And in this first paragraph, what I understood it was that the complaints when people are ambushed in the middle of a parlay, when they're sending their sort of entourage out to go meet with the enemy, to go talk with them, and if they're sort of ambushed along the way, or if their fort gets attacked, that there's this sensibility of offense, right? And this sort of injustice of being wronged because there's that assumption that there's a guarantee of safety. And Montaigne makes the case that, yes, while that is, you're in the right to feel incensed or angered that traditional sense of honor is violated, and that's sort of the more sort of Romanesque sort of sense of honor. But Montaigne's saying, hey, times are changing, and this is no longer the world that we live in.
Yes, and why is that? Wasn't there the technology of the arquebus, or what we think of as a weapon,
development
a gun,
of firearms? So I think so I would say that the technology for firearms was very primitive in comparison to what we have today.
Sure.
But it was still making its introduction into warfare during this time.
And the implications of that is that you can kill somebody from far away and not have that face-to-face combat. What we assume as this honorable act of strength versus strength, it could be I take my opponent off guard and snipe him.
Maybe like my opponent is reloading like their weapon, and that's my shot. That's my opportunity. Mm-hmm. So there's that element of sort of almost the times are changing a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, he goes on to explain the story of the Roman praetor, and this town in Turkey, they try besieging the town. The town says, okay, let's just end this nonsense. Let's have you enter in as friends. Mm-hmm. And then, sorry, technological glitch. So the town lets the Romans in, and the general guarantees, we're just passing through, we're entering as friends, this is great. And then his men completely just turn on him, and they just pillage the city. Mm-hmm. So there's that element of contingency and unpredictability, which proves that even a very disciplined warrior culture like the Romans didn't always have a control of their men.
Sure.
And so I mean, that also goes to prove the point that even when there's a goodwill and a desire to sort of hold up your end of the bargain, there are a lot of contingencies that can take place that prevent you from doing that.
And it doesn't mean the other side's going to hold up that goodwill either.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Or even on your own side, like that example, where you would think that the general would know that, oh yes, we were coming in peacefully, and then all of a sudden his own men turn against him and run wild.
Right. And it's a surprise even to him.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then, I think that the idea of conduct also sort of carries into the next thought that Montaigne has about Cleomenes, the Spartan king. And he notices that Cleomenes believed that anything goes in the time of war, that you can just throw conduct out the window. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because Montaigne says, whoa, hold up, let's pause here, because you think that you're sort of ultimately able or free to do whatever you want, but then you're still on the hook in the eyes of gods and men.
Yeah. Well, he has
and there's that
yeah.
divine retribution.
And he has that example, too, of Cleomenes taking advantage of a truce that was laid out by the enemy he had conflict with, and that he attacked them at night and decimated them. And his excuse was, well, we didn't say anything about truce at night.
Yeah, exactly.
So in a sense, it's finding little holes that you can take advantage of the enemy, but it's not within the lines, I suppose, of what we think of as honorable combat. And I guess that's one thing that Montaigne discusses, and I think that you're going to bring up sooner or later, is that there is a certain limit to what you can take advantage of, but you can still, in combat, take advantage of an opponent's weakness.
Right, yeah, exactly. So, and because Montaigne does make the point that when the time and place permits, that you should actually take advantage of certain things, like when your enemy doesn't know something or makes mistakes. And, you know, it actually kind of reminded me of book 8 of our Marcus Aurelius series with Norman Dixon, right? That idea that you spoke of, that I like, right? It's like about sort of like battlefield victories are usually, it's information and energy.
Yeah, that is what happens in combat, and that it's a battle of those two things. And if you have if what your energy can take over another person's energy, or you can, or the information you receive could affect how you use your energy. Exactly. So it's working within those boundaries, but then you could go outside those boundaries and say you're playing a game of chess, and instead of taking advantage of the moves that they make, you take one of their pieces while they look the other way.
Right.
So there's this limit. It seems that Montaigne is saying that, look, there's a boundary. If you can work within those parameters, as anybody does in combat, that's fine. Right.
There's like that. There are parameters to this contest, because he disagrees with this really cool guy Xenophon, who is a philosopher and a biographer and a soldier. And what happened to Xenophon was he was a mercenary, and the king that he was fighting for died, and his generals were slaughtered while they were negotiating a parley. And it's interesting because Xenophon had to pretty much literally fight his way out of that situation, and Montaigne disagrees with those liberties that Xenophon took. So it's, to a degree, Montaigne might even be more rigid than a lot of sort of battlefield commanders.
Yeah, so then that extends to the idea of, okay, well, some people could think like Ariosto that he quotes, that, well, hey, it doesn't matter. You know, skill, ingenuity, as long as you conquer, it's all fair and good. Just like Cleomenes.
Yeah, and it's a little bit kind of like, it reminds me kind of like the Machiavellian sentiment, right? It's like it's usually the ends justify the means. Yeah.
But Montaigne seems to not agree with that. Or, like you said, he has a more rigid idea of it than maybe we think he does. Or maybe it is rightly rigid in some respect, where he says there are some limits, but...
And that's interesting because there's like that rigidity that he has, but he also sort of contrasts that with the contingencies, because he gives all of these examples of victory being snatched away from all these different warring factions from, the last second, essentially.
That's true. But then he goes on to say, I guess using Chrysippus, that, well, look, if we're running a race, it has to be, like, it's totally fine if you beat me by speed, right? Or by stamina.
Right, like an outright, like a superiority in a contest.
But if you trip me, or if you find a way to rig the race, then that, in some stretch, is wrong. Or maybe not wrong, but it's not honorable.
Right, exactly. And I think that honor, despite the contingencies or the randomness of warfare, is something that Montaigne wants to ensure is a fixed or stable thing.
Yeah, it's a personal thing, because then he uses the Alexander idea where it's like, I would rather complain of fortune than blush for a victory, right? So it almost becomes that, well, it doesn't really matter if the other person views your victory as an honorable one, but it matters if you view yourself as a honorable person at the end of the day. Yeah,
and what's interesting with Montaigne is that he doesn't agree with winning at the expense of being a decent person.
Yeah.
Like, he'd rather be a complete loser and feel like he has some sort of shred of moral dignity. And I think that for me, it's almost, it's in a way, it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around that. But maybe, I don't know, but maybe he was so much more sort of like submerged in total warfare that he might have just said, hey, like, this is just, it's just not worth it. And my favorite was the quotation by Virgil, "Courage, not craft, prevails."
And might overmatches might. Yeah, where it's not so much the guile, but the strength. Strength for strength. And if your strength can overmatch another's, then that is how war should be, or how any contest should be contested, and fought. But, like we discussed in the beginning, there's this acknowledgement by Montaigne that's saying, look, times they are a change, and we cannot live in this la-la land anymore. Or maybe not a la-la land, but this quixotic obsession with honor anymore, because
it can be dangerous, I think, to cling to honor.
Like the one Roman general who said, oh, we're all fine, and then his soldiers just destroy everything.
Yeah, or the one Italian and sort of French faction is starting to negotiate, and the governor is starting to, negotiate the terms of, surrender, basically, from the top of the fortification. And his soldiers just let their guard down because they think, "Ooh, okay, good, like, take a breather," and then they get killed. So I think that it goes to show that you can't really assume that anyone's really gonna hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, and
there's that element, I think, of sort of rightful distrust. Or sort of wariness.
Yeah, and that's something that we all acknowledge, I think, even today, in some respect. That you feel like you can trust somebody to a certain extent, even after you, like you said, you have something like a victory, or even, dare I say, a marriage or anything like that ensures some sort of bond or trust, that there still might be a moment where that could turn against you, or even the sense of having a company formed and doing it with people you quote-unquote trust.
Yeah, it's a level of security, right?
Right, but then it's just a level. It's not 100% security, because how many examples do we see of people taking advantage of their own business?
Right. Like embezzling money or...
Right. And that's just one example, but we can find other examples in friendships, in artistic relationships, social relationships. But there's this idea that there's, like you're saying, and like Montaigne's saying, there's a limit of trust that we can have, and that it might be good to think about honor, and it's good to uphold it, but to also realize that it doesn't work all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that for me, like the greatest takeaway for this was be cautious, but be decent. And you can't, like we've said before, you can't anticipate others to act honorably or do the right thing, even though you might do that. And then, you should just act with courage and decency, and ultimately warfare is not an excuse for a free-for-all to commit atrocities.
But it might happen.
So beware.
Wonderful. No, and I think that just goes right back to Montaigne's idea that humans are unpredictable.
But then it's interesting because it's with Montaigne with all these examples, because he uses ancient and he uses modern or contemporary, so he shows that humans are unpredictable, but almost predictable in like the sort of the scope of history, right?
Universally.
Yeah, universally. People just, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like, people are always gonna be just irrational and random. And we can always count on that.
Thank you, Jordan.
Yeah, so I think with that, we'll close on out for this talk. And if you like what you hear, download us on from the App Store or Google Play. And you can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud. And thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.